we've got one more speaker left today, and I want to introduce Sathpal Singh. Sath's come all the way from Scotland, because if I said from England, I'd probably have to run the other side of that stage. So Sath is here. Sath's going to speak to us also about leadership and many other things, I suspect. So put your hands together for Sath.
Hi everyone, I'm thrilled to be here. As Robin says, I've come all the way from Scotland. I flew in last night, and I think I've pretty much had very little, probably zero sleep, but I feel fantastic, and it's been a wonderful day, and I'm absolutely honoured to be here with you all today and for the invitation from Nana and the team. You've also been wonderful with the welcome, so thank you all. And I've been really impressed with the Q&A sessions, so give yourselves a round of applause. I don't see my slides yet, so... yeah, so there we go. Can we get rid of the Akaditi logo thing? Because a lot of my titles and things are in that corner. Would that be okay? Can we do that? So yeah, I'm going to be talking about leadership as well. I was delighted to hear a lot of the things got mentioned throughout the day, because there's a lot of alignment, which is always a good thing. As Agilists and leaders, we should be looking for alignment. So, a little bit about me. Where's my clicker? Here's my clicker. As Robin says, I'm Scottish. I'm a very proud Scottish Sikh. I was born in Edinburgh. A few shots here just to prove the point. I hope you've been. If you've not, I'd encourage you to visit. I used to work for the Scottish Tourism Organisation as a head of digital delivery some years ago. And I still find myself naturally promoting the country because it is such a beautiful place. So yeah, please visit, as I've done to your beautiful country and continent, my first time. And I do also like a whiskey. That probably won't surprise you for those of you who know a little bit about Scottish culture. A little bit about my Agile journey. It has been a long one for me. I started with my experience of Agile right back at the beginning of my professional career. I was a young man, and I just graduated and left university, and I got my first job as a software engineer. And the organisation I worked for built payment systems, transactional systems, right back at the infancy of the World Wide Web. That's how far back my career goes. In fact, I was doing this stuff before they wrote the manifesto. Yes, that's how old I am. I know you wouldn't think it to look at me. But we used to do something called XP. And XP is extreme programming. It's a flavour of Agile. Some of you might have experienced it. And it really started to get me thinking about the value of these ways of working and iterations, writing user stories and all this good stuff. So that's where my journey began. And then I continued on that path, used various methods and frameworks. I'm not going to be talking about them because others have talked about them in most of my talks. I don't get into that because lots of people do talks on those sorts of things, and there are countless books. So I don't think I could tell you anything you couldn't read in a book or find online when it comes about methods and frameworks, etc. So I opt not to do that. But coming closer to where we are now, the last 5-6 years ago or so, I've broadened out and got more involved in the global community more actively. So I do a number of these sorts of speaker engagements. I've travelled to a number of these other conferences. And really, I think the main thing I'm saying here is I'm constantly interested in sharing and spreading information, learning from others. And frankly, I'm a conference junkie. So I come to a lot of these things because there's so much one can take from this stuff. So that's a little bit of me, but enough of that for now. So I'd like to pose a question to you all. If I were to ask someone you work with how they might see you as a leader and how they would describe you, what do you think they might say? Here's some notable examples of some leaders that we've seen down history. I'm pretty confident you'll probably recognize all of these individuals. I think Angela had some of them as well. And they've all been noted as great leaders for lots of different reasons. Right? We've got politicians here, civil, social activists, etc., etc., etc. Something a little bit closer to home. Most of you would recognize this man. He needs no introduction in this audience. I've been fascinated learning a bit more about all the incredible work that he did. And I didn't know a lot about his history and what he'd accomplished and what he'd done. But it was amazing to read about it. It was fascinating. And one of the things that really stood out for me was the fact that he had such commitment and drive and passion for unifying the nations of Africa. And again, I'm a real big believer in the power and the importance of unity. I don't like divisions. I don't believe in them, and a lot of my work is about trying to break down those divisions. But what is leadership? Angela gave a perspective earlier. If I were to ask 10 of you in this audience what you thought leadership was, we'd get 10 different answers, right? So everybody has a different view, they have a different perspective, they see it through a different lens. This is a definition I've used a lot over the years. Again, I'm not going to read it to you, but you can see I've highlighted some key terms in that sort of light green colour. Apologies to anybody who suffers from colour blindness. But again, these things resonate, right? Influence, inspire, inspiring others, helping, just a simple term, how we help one another, how we help to build things. I'm going to talk a little bit later on about product and achieving things together, right, as a goal, okay? But then on my leadership journey, this also resonates. My leadership journey goes quite far back in my career. And I think some of this is also very true when we do step up and take that call to leadership. And I think sometimes that gets overlooked. Often gets overlooked. So, my journey looks a little bit like this. Again, this is just a summary view. I've picked out and pinpointed and highlighted some of the pivotal moments and stages of my own professional journey and career. So my leadership journey started some years ago, actually. I did start as a software engineer, but I moved into technical leadership roles quite quickly and early on in my career, leading dev teams, and then more into larger teams and departments, building technical divisions, leading offshore teams, and then it moved into other things. But on the left here, there was a greater focus on technical leadership with elements of people management, people leadership, because I had lots of line management responsibilities. And then as you move around it, there was a notable shift. So shifted more towards people leadership and focusing more on people. How do you bring people together? How do you inspire them? And these roles, that's a mixture of roles. So some of them are, actual jobs that I've had. They're professional roles, some of them are paid work, but there's also some voluntary stuff in there. Roles that I wasn't paid for, roles that I did for different reasons. And each thing has enabled me to grow and build on what went before. So everything's helped me to continue to grow. But I think the common thing from this is really the fact that all of these provided an opportunity to demonstrate great leadership. So the platform was there. But when I think about it as well, how far back does our leadership journeys go? So for me, I think it's quite far back, in fact, really far back, perhaps to my childhood. So I'm going to embarrass myself here. This is an early picture of me and my siblings, something Angela talked about in her talk. I'm the oldest of my siblings. That's me there on the left there, sporting what looks to be some sort of Christmas jumper. I don't know what that's about. And that's my brother. So I'm the eldest of my siblings. And I don't know what my sister's happy about, to be honest, but she seems really pleased. And the thing there was, I was the oldest of my siblings, my parents' firstborn. I was the oldest grandchild on my mother's side. In my culture and a lot of our customs, a lot of that came with a lot of expectations. A lot of things there to learn from, and I think a lot of that shaped my early leadership thinking and ideas. From what I've heard from some of my elders, I was keen to help others grow. I was always looking to try to inspire. I was always trying to lead by example, and I probably wasn't thinking about it that much back then, but it really did kind of provide some foundations, I believe. So I'd encourage you all to think about when did that start for you and what might have been the early inspirations. But of course, as we go, coming back to the professional journey, Colleen was talking about Java development earlier. Those days are well beyond me and well past me. So yep, I spent many years in code, networks, servers, mobile apps, websites, and then I moved and pivoted into something that looks more like this. What amuses me about that is Look how miserable they all look sitting in that meeting. So yeah, I moved into a world of planning, succession planning, recruitment, budget stuff, all the things that come in management and leadership. But the point is, that's a real shift for a lot of us, right? So in the UK, we talk a lot about the idea of the accidental manager, right? And there is a notable difference between management and leadership, which I still think some people don't quite understand. So while I was going on my own journey, I was really committed to try to become a better manager and learn how to be a good leader. But I think you have to be prepared to go on that journey. So as I mentioned, management versus leadership. So I did the Chartered Management Institute's Chartered Manager Program, which is the highest qualification you can get in management in the UK. But that journey was an enlightening one for me. And while I was going on that journey, I came across these definitions, which I still use, but I've had these since about 2015. Management, in its simplest form, doing things right. Tick. Processes, recruitment, all the stuff I just talked about. Doing them right, doing them well, processes. Leadership, a slight play on the words here. Just look at all that's happened there, and we've shifted the words. Leadership, doing the right things. And I think that's brilliant just in the simplicity of it, but it's the same words, just pivoted around. So that was really interesting to me. And I've talked there about the idea of the accidental manager, because people get promoted into managerial roles by being good at the job they did before, right? As technical specialists and SMEs and whatever that might be, right? There's a lot of that in industry. But they didn't necessarily, want to move into management. In some cases, they were forced to move into management. And also, they're not equipped. They're not equipped. And they don't get training sometimes, right? There's a lot of that in workplaces. There's a lot of that across industries. And then sorts of situations when they're trying to grapple with these types of problems, they simply don't know how to overcome them. In the past, these things spoke to me. These were questions I used to ask myself. And when I put the slide together, I was thinking, what were those really difficult barriers, and where was the support? And that's why a lot of people fail in management leadership roles, because they don't get this type of support to help them to learn how to do these things. I mean, that's a really diverse set of skills. Okay, that's required. And it takes years and years to become very good at this stuff. And I think sometimes we stop and forget that. But we've moved into the social age now. So I've heard a lot of good stuff today about the change in nature. Marcus talked about VUCA. Marcus talks about VUCA all the time. But organizations are changing and are trying to adapt to the constant changing forces that dominate what they're doing, their marketplaces, all this stuff, right? But we're actually in the social context. Now, I heard a lot of good stuff today about collaboration. But we came from, manufacturing, where people were interested in building things, how you constructed stuff. We shifted into what was more of a kind of knowledge age. There was an acquisition of knowledge. Talked earlier about knowledge economy. But this was back, knowledge was driven by books and academic institutions and literature. And then we shifted into this technology age, digital age, right? But everybody thought it was the be-all and end-all. We had the PCs, we had the internet, and then we all walk around with these really powerful devices in our pocket from which we pretty much live our lives, right? But it wasn't the end, because we've now got to this point where there's so much of this stuff, and there's such ubiquity in technology, we're overwhelmed, right? There's so much content everywhere. How do you make conscious, deliberate choices about what matters to you, what's relevant to you? You have to give that thought. We're now in the age where it's much more around sense-making, trying to derive meaning from things around what actually matters to us. That's the era we're in now. This is the social age and the social context. And it's this current context that we're in that's given rise to the social leader. So social leaders are those who are very committed to fairness and equity and social justice, and a lot of the things that we talk about, but how often do we meet people who are truly committed to these things and good at effecting positive change? What social leaders look like. If you cast your mind back to when I had the slide with the other leaders, some of them in reality fall into that category. So that's where we are now, and the social leaders are the ones that we need now in organizations more than ever. because of all the things that many of you talked about today and we heard from my fellow speakers, which is we still have a lot of bureaucracy in organizations. We still have a lot of hierarchy in organizations, and we have what we call positional authority. People who are granted authority through their position and their title. But that's become less effective than it used to be. And organizations who have understood this and adapted to this, who flatten their hierarchies, have been able to effect more positive change more quickly and create greater agility across their organizations. And that's what social leaders help us to do. And there are a number of examples of this that I've seen across the organizations I've worked, and it's a lot of the stuff I actually practice in what I do, which is building and nurturing engineering communities across a very diverse, heterogeneous group. Large financial organization where we have thousands and thousands of engineers and technical specialists and architects and all these people who are building products, etc., that are being used by millions and millions of end users and customers. So one of the things I've been learning a lot about and using to help me develop social leadership practices is the NET model. So the NET model is based on work from a chap called Julian Stodd, who's a real inspiration of mine. I follow a lot of his work, and he's what he calls a social age explorer. Now, what's great about this model is it allows you to go on this iterative journey of learning how to practice and embed and understand and effectively utilize social leadership behaviors which organizations are crying out for and really need to improve that way that they disseminate information and communicate. And the way this really is done is through these 3 dimensions. So it's called the NET model because it's based on the name of these dimensions: narrative, engagement, technology. You start with the narrative. You start with the narrative. Because the narrative is all about how you create the messages, how do you think about how they're going to be communicated, and then you share. And then if you share them well and you share them in the right communities, the messages amplify. And if the messages amplify, it spreads more, it resonates with people, and you can affect change. And through that, you build authority. Not through formal mechanisms and traditional ways that we communicate, but informal methods. Right? And that's what communities are. So I don't know how many of you here have communities of practice in your organizations, communities of interest. So in the UK, in my organization, we have a lot of these, and that's where the magic happens. That's where there's unheard voices, because those voices don't surface in the traditional hierarchical organizations that we still, right? So that's what this is all about. And then that's how these things work effectively. And you can affect real positive change by going beyond the traditional formal hierarchies. You need informal leadership to supplement and complement formal types of leadership, okay? And what brings this all together is technology. A number of my fellow speakers today have talked about technology. The ubiquity technology needs, obviously, it almost goes without saying, but it's how that technology is used to enable and facilitate what we're trying to do. And in the social age we're in, technology is critical across these diverse organizations, these geographically diverse teams, like many of the teams that I've worked with for many years, and you need to effectively co-create these things across these types of groups and collaborate effectively. But what we're actually trying to do through these mechanisms is build consent, get people aligned and get them to work towards the same common goal so you can all be successful together. And social leaders, it's all about social capital. I heard a lot earlier about emotional intelligence and these types of ideas. That's linked closely to social capital, which in its simplest form is all about how effectively one can communicate and leverage their net relationships. And social leaders have high social capital. They're good at this stuff, and they know how to make this stuff work to effect positive change in the environments they're in, whatever the context is. So that's some of the stuff I've been doing. Active models I've been using to embed these messages and have success in large-scale transformation initiatives. But there are many styles of leadership, right? That goes without saying. Obviously, I couldn't cover them all, and I wouldn't, but these are some of the ones that I've had exposure to over my own journey, starting there in the top right, situational leadership. Again, the name speaks for itself. Situational leadership, where you apply what you need to do based on the situation. It's as simple as that. But that goes back to the 1960s. And then if you move to the bottom left, of course, we've already heard servant leadership. And this is, of course, Robert Greenleaf, who wrote the seminal text on servant leadership. But that book, the original copy, was written in the 70s, right? 1972, 1973. But the thing for me that really resonates, you have to think about, as leaders, coming from a position of service. So that's a slightly different way to think of how servant leadership actually works. I hear it all the time. Servant leadership this, servant leadership that. But when you get to the heart of it, it's about coming from a position of service. And great leaders know how to do that, and that's what they want to do. And then the top left there, some of the softer forms of leadership that we're now seeing. Quiet leadership, again, worked by Julian. Humble leaders. Kindness, grace, fairness, that's what social leaders want to do. They want to flatter these things, have greater equity in organizations. But they're not things that in the past we used to associate with leadership, right? These were not the characteristics that we used to associate. So that's what is really shifting and changing. And as new generations come through, these are the thoughts of things that they're looking for in their leaders, right? The game has changed, leadership has changed, and there's such a lens shone on old traditional forms of leadership. Simply don't work anymore. And of course, I've already talked about social leadership with the net model. So building on all of that, I'm obsessed with the idea of ego and the part that ego plays, right? And a lot of leaders have ego, certainly those who come from, these command and control environments, hierarchical organizations, and they believe they have authority because they sit up here in the organization and you sit down there, right? That doesn't work anymore, right? Now, Thor's work, he's a good friend of mine, Thor Olafsson, he's written a fantastic book which is about going beyond that. And again, this model, the inner compass, is fantastic because if you look at these aspects of it, look at the top there, right at the north. Truth. You want to be able to trust your leaders. Behave in such a way that they can be trusted. And sadly, we've seen a lot of examples of poor leadership, bad leadership, which breaks trust and has catastrophic implications for cultures and organizations. Going around that, you can see some of the other things that link very closely to quiet leadership that I just talked about. But what Thor's really saying is, by using this model and working through it, and again, I'm trying to practice these things, one can learn to become a more conscious leader. And that's really what a lot of his work's about. Greater forms of conscious leadership. And over the last year and a half, I've predominantly found myself in the product leadership space. So a number of other speakers today talked about product managers and product owners. Yeah, sure, they're roles. We need this, but I don't hear enough people talking about product leadership. And that's a lot of what I've been trying to do. Again, I'm leading organizational-wide initiatives. We were building, technologies and mobilizing them and trying to embed them across very diverse groups. And it's really difficult. It's really, really difficult because all these different teams sit in different areas of an organization. They have different cultures, they have different views, they have different agendas, different things that matter to them. And it's very difficult to get all these groups aligned. But if you look at what I've called out here, these things generally relate to leadership more broadly. Being really good at holding a vision. So I spend a lot of my time holding product visions and try to disseminate them and get them across teams and get people to believe in that vision, right? And then having passion for what you do. If you don't believe in the product, why would anybody else? But the same thing applies to leadership. Empathy. We've heard a lot about empathy today. Empathizing with product users. Trying to meet their needs, caring about what things that they need from the product. But again, it applies to leadership more broadly. Innovating. Always innovating. As Agilists, we should always be innovating. Should have a constant desire to improve what we're doing. And then balancing those needs across the different groups. So one of the hardest things in my day-to-day work is balancing the need of stakeholders who have very different concerns and needs, and they don't often care about the others' needs and concerns. We balance across those groups, and that's often how I use social leadership practices to achieve those types of things. So that's a big space, and it's a great opportunity for everyone, not just the product owners or the product managers, anyone involved in developing or product, whatever capacity that might be, to bring product leadership to help the product be a success. And again, we talked a lot about diversity and a few other things, and I've done other talks talking about these sorts of things. You need diversity of thought. You cannot build successful products unless you are approaching your product leadership in that manner and thinking about all the people that the product is there to meet the needs of, and understanding those needs and bringing a dynamic group together to ensure that you have different thinking in there, so that you don't just build a product that only serves the needs of this particular demographic or this other particular demographic. So I think there's great opportunity in all of that. And I love to build diverse teams and see diverse thinking in action. Right, so I'm conscious I've covered quite a lot of stuff here, so I'm just going to do a bit of a summary of some of the key learnings. So those are some of the models and tools that I've practically actively used to support a lot of my work and had a great success with them. And I encourage you to go learn more about them and think about how they could be of value in whatever you're trying to do in your leadership capacity within your organization. But there's learnings in all these things. What are those key learnings? What are the things that really stand out for me and have done over my leadership journey? Bias. I always come back to bias, right? We all have biases, okay? Anybody here who puts a hand up and says, I don't have any biases, you're lying, right? We've all got biases, okay? But we're not always conscious of it, okay? Seeing these sorts of things, that's a cognitive bias wheel. Look how many there are there. I mean, I can't go through all of that, obviously, and I don't intend to. You'll be glad to know. But look how many, look how complex a space that is. That's just an example of the range of cognitive biases that as we as humans have. And now we don't have them all, but if you were to go through them, you'd probably recognize some of them in yourself. But then if you think about some of this stuff on the right here, we are drawn to the details that confirm our own existing beliefs, right? That's what we do as humans. We notice flaws in others more easily than we notice flaws in ourselves. Is that true? Yeah, I'd say so. I feel that I do and have done in the past. Learn to overcome these things. And we fill in characteristics from stereotypes, generalities, and prior histories. And I had a tremendous conversation earlier on where that exact thing happened, right? Because that's the nature of this stuff. Real-life examples of bias that can be seriously problematic, right? We talk a lot about AI, we talk about product. If you train these systems poorly and we don't have great product leadership, these are the sorts of scenarios that arise. These are very noted examples where there's been real bias built into artificial intelligence. The US healthcare system, the US justice system, and Amazon of all places, one of the most technically innovative organizations in the world, training their systems so poorly with the data that they ended up biasing their own recruitment processes in favor of men over women. I mean, can you believe that? That's the sorts of things that happen when we're not conscious of our biases, and we don't explore them, and we don't try to learn from them. And I always find myself coming back to this, right? And I've kind of pretty much led up to this. We're always learning, sure, of course we are. But we also need to unlearn, because there's lots of things that we're probably not doing right or we could be doing better. And as I've just talked about, there are lots of biases and things that are programmed into us from a very young age, right? Through the influences in the early parts of our lives. And we then also need to relearn. Probably one of the best books I ever read, and I think it frankly changed my life. You might know it. Nonviolent Communication from Professor Marshall Rosenberg. And it was Rosenberg who said, we can liberate ourselves from cultural conditioning. Now that's not about our ethnicity and these sorts of things. It's about all these things that are programmed into us very early in our life. And we need to learn from them, and we need to change our thinking. Right? And that's a lot of what I do. And this book really inspired me when I was on that journey. Certainly when I was trying to think about how to become a better manager and how to become a better leader. I don't know how popular Star Wars is in Africa, to be honest. And I did ask my friend Grace Johnson, who sadly couldn't be here. If you don't know, this is Yoda, the Jedi Master. And Yoda famously said lots of brilliant things that I think are very profound. But he talked about fear. Right? And it was Yoda who talked about fear is the path to the dark side. But what Yoda actually said was fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. And I think in organizations we see a lot of suffering. And we see a lot of suffering because there's a lot of fear. And traditional leadership, traditional organizations with really bad cultures, these things, they come from a position of fear. And that's something we need to learn to overcome, right? And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Think about failure. As Agilists, we want to learn fast. But we still struggle with failure. And people don't like to fail and they hate talking about failure. Why? We learn from failure. If you think about Edison inventing the light bulb, he failed, countless times before he invented the light bulb, right? That's what our work looks like. That's what agile practice looks like. Deliberate practice, going beyond fear, creating implementation. And that's how you overcome this stuff in organizations. And encourage people to fail. Fail quickly, but learn quickly, right? If you can learn to do that, you're creating the sorts of cultures where the new generations coming through would want to work, okay? Brené Brown, some of you might recognize her. I'm a big fan of her work. And this also speaks to me because on my own leadership journey, I came to the realization that one has to be comfortable being uncomfortable and taking themselves outside of their comfort zone, right? And I think she puts it brilliantly there. You can choose courage or you can choose comfort. And I came to the realization that I'd never chosen comfort, but it took me years to realize that. You can't have both, right? So again, that applies to our work. It applies to our leadership. It applies to how we build products. Storytelling, one of my favorites. If you want to be successful in organizations and as leaders, we have to become great storytellers, right? So I talked earlier about the net model, talked about the narrative. You have to be able to learn how to create a narrative, a compelling narrative, a narrative that will land. I'm sure this man needs no introduction. He's regarded as one of the best business corporate storytellers there's ever been, right? And Steve Jobs did create compelling narratives. If you watch some of his product launches on YouTube, you can kind of see why. He'd start with a problem, he'd paint this picture of doom and gloom, right? He'd tell you this really terrible story. He'd probably find somebody to vilify. He'd call them out. He did that with IBM back in the day. And then he'd tell you how he was going to solve the problem, right? And he did it. And that's a lot of what great leaders know how to do. But we can all learn how to do that. And some of them that I described earlier, they can help. Lastly, purpose. Right? Daniel Pink, his book Drive, he talks about intrinsic motivators, okay? And I, over the last few years, spent a lot of time thinking more about my own purpose. What is it I'm trying to do? What is it I'm here to do? What should I be focused on, right? And through understanding that purpose, it could really lead us to the real truths, right? About what we're here to do. Inquiry framework, just to support that. So this again is some of Julian's stuff. Got 4 aspects of it, but he's exploring power. So I spent a bit of time exploring power in the context of organizations and leadership. Where does power sit? What's the mechanisms of power? But you can see these really powerful questions, like coaching questions, open questions. You could take these questions and ask them of yourself. You could take them and explain, even organizational, a lot to think about. Some ideas of how things you might want to change. What's the impact of power? What's the shape of power? And this one relates to Brené Brown stuff, that's my space of vulnerability, right? But look at some of the questions on the right there, right? I've highlighted some of them just to call them out because they're the ones that I kind of like. I'm not going to go through them all. What can you achieve alone? Well, very little, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go together, right? What harm can we prevent? That's a really important one. I talked earlier about suffering in organizations. In burnout earlier, I don't know if it was Colleen, somebody mentioned burnout. Some years ago, I was doing too much, had far too much on, I was traveling a lot for work to the Middle East, and I didn't even know I'd burnt out, and I burnt out. So now when I'm coaching and I'm mentoring, I am looking for signs of that in those that I support to help prevent that harm happening to them. That's how we can all think about the different ways that we could bring all our experiences to life and use them to become better leaders. Where does your power sit? That's contextual, right? And we've already talked about fear, because we always look to Yoda for that, right? What do we fear? And I'm getting to the end now, right? But you can apply those things, you can ask those questions of yourself, right? But what I also came to, for me, the power is in the purpose. It's purpose, finding my purpose, what gave me power. And I actually have a different talk called The Power of Purpose, where I explore that in much more detail. So I've heard a lot about challenges. Ed and I talked about challenges earlier. Others have talked about challenges. I like to think more about, where are the opportunities? Where are the opportunities? So why do we keep talking about challenges? Why don't we look at, well, where are the opportunities? What could we be doing here? From a leadership perspective, if you think about everything we've heard about all day, from Marcus, from Angela, from everybody. Somebody else said it as well, right? There's a great opportunity to become more authentic, empathetic, and egoless leaders. I talked about Thor's work. That's where some of the opportunities become. And organizations are crying out for that type of leadership. All great leaders are great at helping other leaders grow into great leaders, right? Gandhi used to have a quote to that effect. As leaders, we need to help everyone to grow, and also leaders come from every level within an organization. Not just those in the C-suite, those with the job titles. There are leaders everywhere. We have to find them and then encourage them to continue to do what they do, because it's going to be of value to the organization. I love talking about nurture. I've deliberately gone for cultivate. And you can probably guess why. This is what we need to do in our workplaces. We need to create great culture. Social leaders thrive in the social context, and they're the ones who help organizations to thrive. Otherwise, you become irrelevant, and we've seen that happen to many notable organizations, and they see it exists because they can't compete anymore, and they're not meeting the needs of their customers. That's what we need to do, and that's what leaders need to do, and that's where the opportunity is, to create a great culture. So in organizations, often, we talk about the fact that culture is typical behaviors, but also culture is the worst bad behavior that leaders are prepared to accept in their organizations. Right? So that's something that everyone can lean into. And lastly, other speakers talked about this as well. Challenge your status quo, right? What works today isn't going to work tomorrow, right? If you don't understand that, you've probably got a fundamental problem there, right? And as Agilists, that's what we're all about. Ongoing, continuous improvement, right? But again, I deliberately use the term serve, right? If you don't change things, you're not effectively serving your colleagues or your customers. A lot of work I do is in the colleague experience space. And I see a lot of my colleagues across these diverse teams as my customers. And I want to meet their needs through the initiatives that I'm leading and ensure that there is positive impact in that work, which allows them to have a positive impact in the work that they do, and so it goes. And just to close, I'm going to leave you all with a call to action. Okay? Be the leader you had, because you probably all had bad leaders. Well, you could take a different approach and learn from all of that. Thank you.
Brilliant. What a way to close the day. You've got it now. You know what leadership is. Awesome. I was making notes, scribbling away myself. Social capital. I'm not great at social media. Bit of a dinosaur. Leadership versus management. Wow. That's a big one. That's a real big one. I've got a few ideas on that, but we'll hear from the audience. Egoless leadership. Wow. That's kind of needed in this environment, isn't it? And here's the other one, the Toyota way, which you mentioned, and that is that a lot of agility came from lean and the Japanese way of manufacturing. And one of the things that Toyota expected and demanded of its leaders was that they reproduce themselves. And they were motivated to do so. I think they had to, it was 4. Each senior leader had to identify, cultivate, and deliver 4 leaders which replicated themselves. I think it's 4. I think the number's 4. I'll have to check it. But that's what they were measured on. And I think Edna spoke about this in terms of incentivizing groups. So that behavior was incentivized, and it was brought up again by Saf. So thank you for that. That is really going to be important on this continent, our continent. So once again, round of applause for Saf, please. Questions? Who has some questions? Because there's some thorny subjects breached here, some really difficult and challenging issues which were really quite well served. So who's got some questions for Saf? Shy at this stage? I know you now. I know you're playing. You're not going to play with me. Do I have to choose somebody? And actually, if Nana comes, he's barred. He's going to close, but he's barred from questions. That's just our thing, right? Okay. I need you to support me on that. And I want to show some. I've been talking about fighting back against the bosses, and I need your support on that. Okay, sir, please.
Sir, thank you for your presentation. I want to ask a question about, you talk about the fear. I want to know, fear and risks, are they the same or did they go together? That's my question.
So you want to talk about whether there's a link between fear and race? Wow, you said thorny subject. He's raised the bar there.
That's why I gave it to you quickly.
So what I'm talking about is, so when I talk about fear in the workplace, I'm talking about people's own agendas and protectionism and territoriality, and that's the things that create organizational silos, right? And a lot of the work that I do in the initiatives I talked about is about breaking down those silos so that information flows freely and effectively across organization. And my organization is a global organization, and there's tens and thousands of people. It's a really hard thing to do, but we should endeavor. So I'm not really talking about that type of fear, but again, there are many forms of fear, and it comes in many forms, right? So now we've got all these diversity, inclusion initiatives, etc., because we are trying to move beyond what we've seen traditionally with white male-dominated boardrooms, etc., and a lot of that stuff still exists, sadly. And ensuring that we in my organisation we do a lot of work to improve the gender imbalance in our engineering workforces, right? So we still have predominantly, a male-dominated workforce, but we have some brilliant female engineers, right? So those are the types of things that I'm talking about. But it takes courage to overcome them. And to be honest, you can look at anything that is of interest to you and say, you know what, I don't think this is right. And again, that's back to social leadership. And I'd like to make a positive impact and improve this. There's nothing stopping you doing that, right? If that's something you think is wrong, that's what social leaders would do. They would call that out. They would challenge the status quo, and they would look to improve that in the most respectful, consensus-building way that they could. Does that help?
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to serve the lady first, and then I'm coming to you, sir, okay?
You're learning.
Eventually. Got to the end of the day, right?
Hi, thank you for this opportunity. I like this topic because I've enjoyed good leadership and it really changed my life. Okay, hi, thank you for this opportunity. Yes, I like this topic because I've enjoyed leadership and it really changed my life. Yeah, so thank you. So I have this question. In case you're working with someone and you don't really like his or her style of leadership, is because leaders comes with their belief system and how they organize or the way they want to conduct a team. So in case you are in a team and you don't like how maybe the boss is running the affairs of the team, how do you go about it? How do you, because it's, when I believe that a leader comes with its systems of beliefs that try to impose around. So what if your spirit or your inner being doesn't resonate with the style of the it?
So I did struggle to hear some of that. I don't know if you can summarize that, Robin, or...
So I think the essence of the question, and correct me if I get this wrong, is that if you are working with someone whose style of leadership doesn't accord or resonate with yours, how do you go about influencing that change? Is that right, ma'am?
Great. Okay, great question. Well, one of a lot of us have to, especially when we move up in the organisations, is you have to learn to manage up the way. So that's something we talk about a lot in organisations. I think the way that works, again, it will depend on the context. So there's no one straightforward answer that fits that type of question. One size doesn't fit all, as they say. But I think it's, again, about, so when we try to influence, what are we doing? We're trying to change someone else's perspective or their view or their thinking, which is quite difficult because it's very hard to change people, really, and I think, again, that's something that's overlooked. So I think the way we do that, so I talked about storytelling, I talked about purpose, and I talked about how we bring all these sorts of ideas together. That's how we affect change, but that's across the board. That's in organisations, it's in our teams, it's how we interact with one another. The social age that I was talking about, this age, the era we're in now, has changed the way that we build relationships with one another, professionally, in the workplace. So in an old hierarchical command and control view of the world, and and Robin and Anna and others were talking about it earlier, you would have a much more subservient way that you dealt with your manager, leader. But now you shouldn't, and you shouldn't, because the best leaders want to be challenged. The leaders who don't want to be challenged are those that I talked about earlier, who come from a position of fear and are trying to protect something because it serves them to do so, right? So the secret is to challenge, but do it respectfully and have an exploratory conversation and lead up to it. You don't take a big bang approach because that usually doesn't work. People shut down. So you've got to kind of, put the groundwork down and build. And as you go, you do a bit more of it, and then you have to effect some influence over your leader, especially if you can help them to see the value in what you're saying and evidence that through data, for example, right? That could make a big difference. I don't know if I answered your question, but some perspectives.
Thank you, Saf. Definitely answered. Thank you. We've got yourself. General, could you, I was going to say get the boss, but he's just turned up.
So under product leadership, you mentioned product vision. Under product leadership, you mentioned product vision.
Yes.
So what should inspire the product vision? How do you go about developing the product vision? Is there like a particular approach in developing the product vision, or what should inspire one to develop a product vision? What are the things you should look out for? Thank you.
Great question. So the reason I talked about that stuff and linked it back to some of the other themes in the talk was because these things are universal to leadership, right? Great leaders know how to create compelling visions. So the important term in that is compelling, right? So I've written product visions, I've created them, and I've socialized them across large product communities. And they'll land, and they only land in work where other people could see what it means for them, right? So whatever we do, you have to help someone understand how it's going to change their life or improve it. That's why I cited Steve Jobs, because he did that brilliantly. When he launched the Mac, when he launched the iPod, when he launched the iPhone, every time he helped everyone understand that basically they wouldn't be able to do without this product, right? So it's all about saying, how am I going to improve your life? And a lot of my initiatives, the ones that have been successful, they are successful because the vision within that is all about creating a narrative which says, here's where we are now, and these things aren't good. But if we go on this journey together, and we collaborate, and we build consensus, and we get to this place, this is the improvements we're going to see. And this is how your life will be better. That's, to me, what vision creation looks like. Does that help?
All right. Seth, nice presentation. So a decade ago, right, when I started my leadership journey, the pressure was more of delegate, right? Because I also say you're doing too much, you can't do, you need to delegate, right? Now, half a decade ago, I hardly hear that word. Now it becomes collaborate, right? So in your journey, what happened to delegate, and how did collaborate override delegate? Is this still relevant? You see that confusion? If you can help me out here.
Right. So, great question. So, like a lot of these things, one doesn't replace the other. These things are complementary, right? So if you think about the Agile values in the original manifesto, Chris was talking about this stuff earlier, right? When they authored the values, it was, people and interactions over processes and tools, one over another, not instead of or an alternative to, we value this stuff more than we value this stuff, right? I delegate, I have teams, I ask people to do things, but I would never delegate if I couldn't clearly ask someone, tell someone, sorry, or rather, ask someone to do something without being very clear of what I was asking them to do. What we see in organizations is very poor delegation, where bad managers or poorly equipped managers, or those who aren't good at these sorts of things, will basically pass their work onto their teams and give it to other people, but it's not well formed, and they're not being very clear of what they're expecting of people. And what happens? The person doesn't meet their expectations, because they weren't very clear with their expectations in the first place. So if you're going to delegate, you have to delegate well. And you should only delegate something, I think, if there's enough shape around it and you could do it, but you're choosing to delegate it for two reasons. One is because you legitimately don't have the capacity, or you see it as a growth opportunity for the person you want to delegate it to. But also, you would do this in a collaborative fashion. You wouldn't tell someone to do something. You would ask them, or you'd say, I'd be quite keen for you to pick this up. What do you think? Do you think you could do that? What do you think the challenges might be? What support do you need from me? Have that type of conversation. And that makes all the difference. So you need both, but again, you have to learn to become adept at doing both. And you do that through practice.
We're going to take one more, and we're going to release you after that. This is magnificent. You are getting gold, platinum, precious metals, diamonds, everything. Wonderful stuff.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you. We're getting not just gold, but premium gold. Thank you for your presentation. And the process of your presentation, you did talk about management and leadership. Management basically around knowing what to do, and leadership basically doing it right. Putting both together, it's all about empowering your team and people around you to make decisions that would actually help them to build up that leadership quality, because leadership is all about making right decisions. So apart from delegation, which is the common tool that you use in actually building up the team to make decisions. What other kind of tools would you put in place to ensure that your team develop that confidence to make that informed decision, so that when the leader is not there, the team still continues to run and makes decisions and reduce escalation processes? Thank you.
Wow, that was a multifaceted question. Yeah, again, there's lots of perspectives on this. We talk a lot about empowerment, right? We talk a lot in Agile about self-organizing teams, right? Now, how often do we really see this stuff? You don't see it very often. And the reason you don't see it is because, sadly, people aren't often truly empowered. So we talk about the product owner role. That's a role that should have a lot of autonomy, but a lot of the time, product owners get put under a lot of pressure who are often driving what you're trying to do with the product. It's the same in teams. So the way I look at it simplistically is, you talked a lot about decision making. Now, decisions should be, you should empower your team to be able to take the decisions that are theirs to take. So, for example, in its simplest term, we talk about Agile, you talk about, good Scrum teams. Good leaders know to let the team get on with the work, right? So a Scrum Master should be able to facilitate that for a team, right? So my perspective has always been, the leader's role is to be very clear on the why. So I talked a lot about vision and various other associated ideas, and the what, and you let the team worry about the how, because they're the experts. They should know, and usually do know, how to get things done, and they will organize themselves around the work if they have the skills to do so. That to me is what empowerment looks like. That's what decision making looks like. I don't develop anymore. I haven't done for years, but I was a software guy for some years. I of turning to develop them how to write their code or how to architect things and how to refactor it, because I'm not equipped anymore, and I shouldn't be doing that because they know me. So the leader's role is really about creating the space, the platform for teams to be successful, right? And it's the same with leadership. So some of the things I'm talking about there are, you create the right cultures, you set in your organization success. So the way I would think about it. Does that help? Useful? Okay. Back to you, sir.
Fantastic. Wonderful session. Yeah, we're letting him wait. He's been giving me instructions all day. I'm rebelling.
So has he been delegating, is he?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that it's delegating. It's just issuing commands, isn't it?
No, I think we need to have a conversation later.
Round of applause for Saf. Come on, let's give it up for him. Thank you very much.